What kind of cook can turn an entire cattle drive upside down? That's the question that haunted every man at Red Rock Ranch the day Lila, Ironhand McKenna rode into town. They'd heard the stories before she even arrived. Rumors whispered in saloons on dusty trails, carried by the wind from one ranch hand to the next. Some said she could handle a skillet like a gunslinger handles a six-shooter. Others said she didn't just fight, she survived where most men would fall, leaving trouble and enemies scattered behind her like dry leaves in a storm. Nobody knew what to expect, and yet everyone could feel the shift in the air the moment she appeared. The cowboys standing by the corral straightened, eyes narrowing, spines stiffening. There was something about the way she rode, confident, unhurried, a kind of calm that hinted at danger. Lila McKenna didn't make a sound, and yet the ranch seemed to hold its breath. Every glance, every murmured warning, hung in the hot air like a secret waiting to be uncovered. Caleb Brooks, one of the older hands, nudged his partner with an elbow, his voice low, rough with unease. "You see her? They say she's trouble, real trouble." His words were half warning, half confession, because even he didn't know if he meant it for the cowboys or for himself. Lila didn't answer and she didn't have to. She simply observed the ranch, her eyes taking in the mess of wagons, the tired cattle, the restless men. Her lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, not quite a smirk, more like a warning. And then she muttered under her breath, words meant only for herself. "Just 6 mouths to feed. Shouldn't be so hard, if they survive the trail." In that moment, the men of Red Rock Ranch understood something they hadn't expected. This wasn't going to be a simple cattle drive. This wasn't just another hand coming to cook a few meals and disappear. Lila McKenna had a reputation, yes, but she carried more than skill in her skillet or fire in her gun. She carried the kind of presence that could shift the balance of an entire ranch, an entire crew, maybe even an entire trail. Some watched her with curiosity, others with caution, and a few, adventurous, foolish, or perhaps just tired of the quiet life, felt a spark of excitement. Whatever was coming next, it would not be ordinary. And in the back of every cowboy's mind, a single nagging thought refused to leave. If this woman could change a cattle drive, what else was she capable of? Lila Ironhand McKenna wasn't just another face at Red Rock Ranch. From the moment she stepped off her horse, the air seemed to shift around her. There was a weight in her gaze, sharp and calculating, like she had seen the worst the world could throw at her, and survived. The cowboys, 6 rough men who had weathered more dust storms and cattle stampedes than they could count, stopped in their tracks, unsure whether to respect her or fear her. Caleb Brooks, the oldest of the group, scratched at his stubbled chin, eyes narrowing. "She looks like she's trouble, that one." His voice carried more than a warning, it carried memory. He'd seen too many people with reputations that didn't match their courage. Lila's presence, however, made him pause. There was a certainty about her that made hesitation feel like folly. Then there was Jethro Hayes, quick with a grin and quicker with a tongue. He muttered under his breath, loud enough for a few to hear, "A cook with a pistol? That's a combination I don't trust." But even he couldn't hide the flicker of curiosity, the way his eyes followed her movements as she surveyed the ranch. She moved with purpose, inspecting wagons, counting supplies, and noting every detail with the precision of someone who had lived life on the edge for far too long to waste a single mistake. Silas Boone, steady and methodical, leaned on the fence post and finally spoke, his voice calm but carrying weight. "I've seen a lot of folks come through these parts. Most don't last a week before they run. I've got a feeling she won't be running." And then there was Lila herself. She didn't answer back with words. She didn't need to. Every glance, every tilt of her head, spoke volumes. She was a woman who had fought, bled, and outsmarted men who thought themselves untouchable. And now she was here to cook. 6 mouths to feed, 6 lives to keep moving along a trail that had already claimed too many. Her eyes lingered on the men, assessing them as carefully as they were assessing her. She could see the doubt, the suspicion, even the quiet admiration hiding beneath rough exteriors. "You'll eat my food," she thought, "and if you survive the trail, you might just live to respect me." The rumor of her past lingered in the shadows of the ranch. Tales of Black Mesa, narrow escapes, and Ginsmoke trails whispered through the wind, but Lila didn't let it define her. Not here, not yet. Here she had a task, a trail, and a crew who would have to accept her, skills, secrets, and all, if they wanted to make it through what lay ahead. Every man at Red Rock Ranch understood something important in that moment. This cattle drive would be unlike any they had known. Ordinary cooks prepared meals and disappeared with the morning sun. Lila McKenna, she had a fire in her hands, a past that could ignite chaos, and a mind that could bend the trail to her will. And as the sun climbed higher over Silver Springs, one truth became painfully clear. The next few weeks would test every ounce of courage, every spark of skill, and every thread of loyalty these men had. And none of them, least of all Lila, would come out the same. Life on the trail was never easy, but with Lila Ironhand McKenna in charge of the chuck wagon, the ordinary challenges of a cattle drive suddenly took on a new shape. The mornings were long, the sun harsh, and the dust relentless, but the crew began to notice something they hadn't expected. Lila could turn chaos into order. She moved with precision, barking out orders that were more suggestions than demands, yet every man found himself obeying without question. She measured flour, checked the meat, and stirred the stew with the same intensity she might have used to reload a gun under fire. It was uncanny. There was a rhythm to her work that seemed impossible, yet perfectly natural. Caleb Brooks, initially wary, muttered as he hauled water to the wagon, "I'll admit, I didn't think she'd last a day. But she makes this mess of a camp feel like a place worth surviving." Jethro Hayes, who had been quick to mock her arrival, found himself impressed by how efficiently she organized supplies. "She's methodical." "I can't say I expected that," he confessed quietly to Silas Boone, who simply nodded, watching Lila's every move. The cowboys quickly realized that feeding 6 men on the trail wasn't just about cooking. It was about morale, timing, and keeping everyone alive. And Lila excelled at all 3. She knew which men could handle the long hours, who needed a sharp word, and who needed a steady hand. In the evening, when the sun sank low and the wind swept across the plains, the camp felt different. Safer. Sharper. Even the cattle seemed calmer when she moved among them. But there was more than just cooking happening here. Lila's reputation as Iron Hand lingered in the air. Small glimpses of her past, an instinctive reach for a pistol at a sound in the brush, the way she sized up every approaching shadow, reminded the men that she was no ordinary cook. And while respect began to grow, so did a quiet unease. Each man knew that trouble had a way of finding those with fire in their veins, and the trail ahead was far from forgiving. As she stirred the stew and checked on the horses, Lila allowed herself a small, wry smile. She could see the doubt in their eyes, and the curiosity too. Every spatula flipped, every instruction shouted across the camp, was a test. And with each passing day she proved something simple yet profound. The trail would bend to those who respected it, and survival belonged to those who respected each other. By the end of the first week, the men no longer whispered warnings about her. Instead they watched, learned, and in small ways followed. They still didn't fully trust her past, but trust was a luxury they couldn't afford, not on this trail. And for Lila that was fine. She didn't need them to trust her history, she only needed them to live to the next sunrise. Because she knew as well as anyone, that the trail didn't forgive the unprepared, and danger, especially her kind of danger, was always just over the next ridge. Just as the crew began to settle into a rhythm, the past they had all tried to ignore rode in on the wind. A shadow across the plains, a ripple of movement that carried more than dust. It carried a warning. Lila Ironhand McKenna stiffened, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the horizon. She knew that silhouette, knew the weight it carried. Ronan Deadeye Calloway. The outlaw whose name still left a bitter taste in her mouth. The man she had outsmarted in Black Mesa. The man who had sworn revenge the day she disappeared from his grasp. And now, here he was, cutting across the plains with enough men to tear the trail apart. The cowboys sensed it too, though they couldn't yet put a name to it. Horses snorted nervously, the cattle shifted uneasily, and the air seemed to thicken with anticipation. Lila moved quickly, shouting orders that carried over the sudden tension. Each man fell into place as she directed them, her voice a razor cutting through panic. "Get the herd in tighter," she barked. "Emmett, Thad, keep the flank. Caleb, Rufus, behind the wagons now." The first shots rang out before anyone could truly react. Bullets tore into the dry earth, throwing up clouds of dust. Panic swept across the herd like wildfire, hooves pounding the ground in chaotic rhythm. The cowboys scrambled, shouting over the gunfire, trying to keep the animals from scattering into the plains. And through it all, Lila moved like a storm incarnate. She didn't just survive the bullets, she anticipated them. She directed, defended, and fought, not recklessly but with the precision of someone who had faced death before and come out alive. Each command was calculated, each movement purposeful. Deadeye's laugh carried across the dust, cruel and mocking. "Thought you could hide, Lila?" he called, spurring his horse forward. "Thought you could run from your past?" Lila didn't flinch. She didn't hesitate. "I don't hide," she shouted back, her voice steady despite the chaos. "I survive." In that moment the cowboys saw her in a new light. She was no ordinary cook. She was the force they had underestimated, the fire they hadn't expected. And for the first time the trail wasn't just about surviving the elements or the cattle or even the long hours, it was about surviving a storm that carried human malice, cunning, and revenge across every mile of dirt and sky. As the gunfire rattled and the herd lunged, the men of Red Rock Ranch realized something chilling. This drive would not just test their strength or their skill or their courage. It would test their loyalty, their trust, and their ability to follow someone who was as dangerous as the very threat that now loomed over them. The dust hadn't even settled before Lila Ironhand McKenna began turning chaos into order. The herd had scattered, the men were shaken, and the plains seemed suddenly more dangerous than ever. But for Lila, danger wasn't a signal to freeze, it was a call to act. Every movement was precise, every command deliberate, and every eye in the camp followed her lead without question. "Caleb, take the left flank," she barked, her voice cutting through the ringing silence of adrenaline. "Silas, Emmett, round up the stragglers before they stampede into the ravine." The cowboys, still reeling from the ambush, moved as if she were an extension of the land itself. They obeyed not out of fear, but because they realized she knew the trail better than anyone, and the enemy they faced would only exploit hesitation. Lila was more than a cook, more than a survivor, she was a strategist, a leader forged in fire, and the men were beginning to see it. With every passing hour the attacks became more daring. Deadeye Calloway's men pressed the hunt, probing weaknesses, trying to scatter the herd and break the crew. But Lila anticipated each move. She positioned the cowboys along ridges, used the natural dips in the plains to funnel the cattle, and turned the wagons into defensive positions. Her knowledge of the terrain became their advantage. "Thad, hold the ridge," she called. "Rufus, keep the fire steady." In the midst of gunfire and dust, Lila's calm focus became almost unnatural. The cowboys watched her, hearts pounding, realizing that her reputation was not an exaggeration. She didn't just react, she predicted, she controlled, she adapted. And slowly the tide began to turn. Each small victory, saved cattle, outmaneuvered attackers, injured men protected, built their confidence not just in the trail but in her. Yet even as they gained ground, the shadow of Deadeye loomed. Lila knew he was studying them, waiting for a mistake, looking for that one crack she couldn't fill. And she also knew the truth that kept her awake at night. The trail was long, the cattle drive grueling, and survival wasn't just about muscle or courage, it was about trust. Trust in the men she led. Trust in herself. Trust that her past wouldn't come back to destroy everything she had fought to protect. By nightfall, the cowboys were exhausted but alive, their faith in Lila growing with every decision she made, every danger she turned to their advantage. Around the campfire, she allowed herself a brief moment of reflection, letting the warmth of the fire touch her weary face. She could hear their murmurs, quiet admiration mixing with lingering doubt. And she allowed herself a small, wry smile. This is only the beginning, she thought. The trail has more tests. Deadeye won't give up. The cattle won't cooperate. And the wind will always try to betray us. But we'll survive. Because we have to. And because I won't let anyone, no man, no outlaw, take this drive from us. The plains stretched out before them, dark and unforgiving under the setting sun. And in that moment, every man at Red Rock Ranch knew a simple truth. Lila McKenna wasn't just a cook. She was the force that would keep them alive. The force that would turn the trail in their favor or die trying. And as they prepared for the night and the dangers yet to come, one thought hovered in every mind, unspoken but undeniable. The real test was only just beginning. The sun had barely risen when the trail led them to Iron Cliff Canyon, a narrow pass carved by time and wind, where the rocks rose like silent sentinels over the open plains. Lila Ironhand McKenna scanned the horizon, her sharp eyes noting every shadow, every movement, every ripple in the dust. This was it, the place where strategy would meet chaos, where skill would meet raw force, and where the trail would finally test everything she and the cowboys had fought to survive. Deadeye Calloway and his men were waiting, their silhouettes dark against the rising sun. The outlaws had numbers, firepower, and experience, but Lila had the terrain, the element of surprise, and something far more dangerous. A crew who trusted her completely. "Hold the ridge," she shouted, positioning the men with precision. "Use the rocks. Don't let them split the herd. We move together or we don't move at all." The first shots rang out, sharp and sudden, echoing off the canyon walls. Dust and dirt exploded around the cowboys' boots as they took cover, firing when they could, moving only when necessary. The herd panicked at the sound, hooves pounding like thunder, but Lila remained unshaken, directing every action with calm, unyielding authority. Deadeye sneered, spurring his horse closer. "You think a woman and a bunch of ranch hands can stop me?" he shouted over the gunfire. "You're in my territory now." Lila didn't flinch. Her rifle rose, her aim steady. "This isn't your territory," she called back. It never was. The canyon erupted into chaos. Bullets ricocheted off stone, horses screamed, and smoke drifted across the dust-choked air. The cowboys moved in unison, each man following Lila's lead, each action calculated. Where others saw disorder, she saw opportunity. Where others panicked, she found advantage. Deadeye charged forward, aiming to break through and scatter the herd. But Lila anticipated his move. With a combination of sharp strategy and fearless precision, she blocked his advance, using the terrain to funnel him into a trap. Every shot she fired, every command she gave turned the tide until finally the outlaw and his men faltered. And then it came to the final moment. Deadeye, desperate and enraged, faced Lila directly, under the narrow sunlit sky of Iron Cliff Canyon. He raised his weapon, but she was faster. One precise shot disarmed him. One swift maneuver left him trapped. The men around him surrendered, realizing that the tide had irrevocably turned. Lila lowered her rifle, breathing steadily, scanning the canyon. Her crew was battered but alive. The herd had survived. And Deadeye Calloway, once a shadow that haunted the plains, was broken, defeated by the woman they had called a cook. The canyon fell silent, save for the ragged breathing of cowboys and the distant thunder of hooves settling once more. Lila allowed herself a long exhale, the tension finally leaving her shoulders. Around her, the crew emerged from cover, their eyes wide with awe and relief. Caleb Brooks approached, voice low but filled with respect. You did it? You really did it?" Lila's gaze swept across the canyon, lingering on her crew, the herd, and the horizon beyond. "We did it," she said quietly. "All of us. And don't you forget it." For the first time since they had met her, the cowboys saw Lila McKenna not just as a cook, not just as a legend whispered in towns far away, but as the force that had carried them through fire, bullets, and chaos. And as the sun climbed higher over Iron Cliff Canyon, one undeniable truth shone brighter than the morning light. Survival wasn't about muscle or numbers. It was about skill, courage, and the relentless will to defy the impossible. The battle over, the canyon quiet once more, Lila, Ironhand McKenna allowed herself a moment to breathe. The sun stretched across the plains, golden and forgiving, painting the dust and sweat of the trail in warm light. Around her, the cowboys of Red Rock Ranch gathered, battered, bruised, but alive. They had survived bullets, chaos, and the relentless force of Deadeye Calloway, and they had done it together. Caleb Brooks, still shaking from adrenaline, approached her slowly. His voice carried awe and respect. "I'll admit it. I never thought we'd make it through this. Not with him, not with all this." He gestured to the canyon, the scorched ground, the scattered cattle. "But you let us. You kept us alive." Lila allowed herself a small smile, one that carried the weight of the trail and the fire of every challenge she had faced. "We kept each other alive," she said quietly, her eyes sweeping the men she had come to trust, the crew who had learned that courage was more than muscle, and that survival was more than luck. The herd, though scattered and weary, had survived. The wagons were battered but functional. And somewhere in the back of her mind, Lila knew that this victory was only one step along a longer journey. But for now there was triumph, and it was sweet. The men worked together to repair, to gather, to breathe. Even Jethro Hayes, ever the skeptic, nodded toward her with newfound respect. "I'll be damned, you weren't just a cook. You were everything we needed." And Lila? She looked toward the horizon, the endless plains stretching out before her. There would always be another threat, another challenge. But she had learned something essential along the trail. She could face whatever came, and so could the men who chose to follow her. As the sun climbed higher, dust settling, the camp took on a quiet rhythm once more. The cattle moved with calm certainty, the wagons rolled steadily, and for the first time in days there was peace. Lila glanced at Caleb, at Jethro, at Silas and the others, and allowed herself a thought she rarely admitted aloud. Perhaps she had found a place she could call home, even if only for a moment. "We'll make it," she said softly to herself, almost a whisper, but one filled with determination. "We'll make it through this trail and any trail to come." And as she mounted her horse, riding along the winding path back toward Red Rock Ranch, one truth was undeniable. Lila McKenna, the outlaw cook who had defied every expectation, had earned her place, not just on the trail but in legend. The men followed, the herd moved steadily, and the plains stretched before them, wide and wild, full of possibility. For the crew of Red Rock Ranch and for the woman who had changed their fate, the trail was no longer just a test. It was a story, one of courage, of fire, of survival, and one that would be remembered long after the dust had settled.